Hi everyone, I'm Brie Cordes with Code Pink. Yay, Code Pink, who's representing. We have our War is Not Green shirt on, which we're selling at the table. But this panel is preventing domestic environmental damage of militarism. So first we have Mike Stagg. Mike Stagg is a writer, journalist, and citizen activist based in Lafayette, Louisiana. He's currently writing a book on the corrupting influence of the oil and gas industry in his home state. Okay. Yeah, you can speak there. Yeah, you can speak there or up here if you want, either way.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here. I was reading Chalmers Johnson's book, Blowout, when I got invited to speak here, Blowback, when I got invited to speak here. In it, there was extensive coverage of reporting on the environmental problems in Okinawa that were a result of basically almost 70 years now of U.S. military occupation of that island with impunity and immunity, describing the pollution of air, ground, and water on the island resulting from the operation of the American bases there, land that the U.S. military confiscated from Japanese citizens after World War II when we set that up as a base. And the impunity that American military people have operated with there has been demonstrated over the years through a number of high-profile cases involving rapes, murders, hit and runs, all with no impact on the American servicemen involved in those incidents. Under the Status of Forces Agreement, we learned about those things, I guess, most recently after the Iraq War, and where we could not reach an agreement with that country over immunity for U.S. soldiers for any actions that they took acting under their role as military members of the military. So Chalmers Johnson has this quote, if you could. Here's the book. It just talks about, the extensive pollution there and how the United States proclaims that we are deeply concerned about the quality environment there, but we don't do anything really at all to pay for the damage we've inflicted there. And next slide, please. This is a map of Okinawa. These are the red are the U.S. bases there. We have most of the island. We've occupied that island since the 1940s. So this is what I was reading when I got invited to speak here, and it was kind of out of the blue. But I learned that the reason I had been invited here was related to an environmental fight that took place in northwest Louisiana that involved an ammunition dump, former Army ammunition dump at Camp Minden. Next one. Camp Minden is about 30 miles east of Shreveport. Shreveport, if you look at the map, is over to your left. There's a Barksdale Air Force Base is a little bit to the right of Shreveport. Barksdale is where we have a lot of B-52s based, a lot of bombing that goes on in the Middle East using B-52s. Those planes come from there. It's also where President Bush went to hide out on 9/11. He stopped in Shreveport for a while because nobody's going to go to Shreveport. And so he was there for a while. So Camp Minden for years, for decades, was a U.S. Army depot. And on, next slide, it's 15,000 acres situated between I-20 and US 80. Minden, the town of Minden, is the upper left, the upper right of the photograph there. But it's fairly sparsely populated up there. These are people, they live not far off the Barksdale base, strong support for the military there. Shreveport was trying to get a cybersecurity center established there, built a building, got some cyber stuff going on there, but some other community actually won it. But it's a level of high patriotism. The military is their friend. That's the way this was viewed. Next slide. So on the night of October 15th in 2012, something major happened. There was a major explosion. At first, people thought maybe it was a meteor, maybe it was an earthquake. This is the National Weather Service report on it. It was an explosion from Camp Minden. The plume showed up on radar, National Weather Service radar, for about 40 minutes. People weren't sure what had happened, though. The next day, Louisiana State Police go out, and the Webster Parish Sheriff's Department goes out, and it turns out there was an explosion there. There are actually a couple of explosions. The U.S. Department of Defense had contracted with a company called Explo Services that was supposed to be disposing of what turns out to be about 16 million pounds of propellant and munitions that had been stored there. Well, they were bringing it from different parts of the country, but they were not disposing of it. They were just stacking it there. It was stacked in bunkers. It sprawled out, if you can. This is outside of bunkers, outside of buildings. It was everywhere. It was just like, if you think about it, 15,000 acres, 16 million pounds, that's over 1,000 pounds per acre of explosives scattered around there. Well, shortly after this explosion, people are asking questions about Explo Services. Explo Services declares bankruptcy and tries to walk away from it. And the people who ran Explo Services were indicted and convicted of fraud and have gone to prison, but it still left 16 million pounds of munitions, highly unstable. There were a couple of other smaller explosions that happened after that. But a couple of, 16 million pounds of explosives. And so the Army had a clear and easy plan approved by EPA Region 6. We're just going to burn it all in the open air. We're going to do about 80,000 pounds a day. And where it goes, nobody knows. Next slide, please. So what happened was really amazing. There was a spontaneous grassroots movement that sprang up in northwest Louisiana among these patriots who otherwise would never question anything the military did. Dr. Brian Salvatore is a chemistry professor at LSU Shreveport. And he immediately recognized what would happen if you started burning these quantities of propellant and munitions, again, over a 200-day period, about 80,000 pounds a day. What would the likely impact be? And the winds would blow anywhere. So he sort of sounded the alarm and spoke out against it. And this concerned citizens of Camp Minden sprung up. It's Frances Kelly, who lives in Shreveport. She's an activist, and she really spearheaded this aggressive grassroots campaign that turned this thing around. And they actually ended up forcing the Defense Department, the EPA, the state of Louisiana, because the state of Louisiana, the Louisiana National Guard now actually has control of the base, and got them to go through great expense to do a control burn, a high impact burn, a high pressure burn that was much cleaner than an open air burn, where, but we're not sure exactly how much cleaner it was because they didn't do that level of monitoring. So, but there were daily action calls. We were calling Gina McCarthy. We were calling our U.S. senators, our congressmen, the governor's office, EPA Region 6. It was just real methodical. Every day there was actions. Here's what you do. Here's who you call. If you want a script, here's a script. And again, they went through huge expense to get this burn unit. Next slide, please. These are useful idiots. David Vitter was our senator at the time. He was running for governor. John Fleming was the congressman from that era. He was running for the Senate the next year. Both of them fierce ideological opponents of the idea of protecting the environment or the EPA. But what Brian and Francis and the activists there were able to do was turn their anti-EPA sentiment of these two guys into advocates for them to change the plan to go from open burn to some kind of controlled burn. So it's a neat little bit of political jujitsu that took place, again, with these two guys. And the activists were really, they didn't pull the wool over their eyes, but they used their hostility in a creative way. Next slide, please. Okay, so instead of an open burn, a company called ESI, Explosive Specialists International, brought in, they shipped this thing by barge and truck. I think it started in Oklahoma. They ended up going through Arkansas. They came down the Mississippi River. They came across I-20. They end up creating this burn unit. And in April of this year, around the 14th, they completed the burning of about 15 million pounds. They completed the burn of what they had on site. Of course, it's Louisiana, so somebody says, hey, you know, we can make a business out of this. Why don't we just keep that facility there? And of course, the deal from the start had been, no, you burn these munitions and you tear it down. And so there was a company, you know, in Minden sprang up, say, hey, we want to become minority partners in this deal. How about it? And the activists said, no, it has to go away. And on April 21st, it was agreed that this will be dismantled and moved away. And so that's what's going to happen. Now, it's not all a happy story. Next slide. Okay, this is Colfax, Louisiana, is about 90 miles south of Minden. It's north of Alexandria in central Louisiana. Prior to the arrival of Clean Harbors, the kind of an ironic name for the company, Colfax is most noted for the Colfax Massacre in the 1870s, which was the spark that led to the Redeemer movement that ended up the white militant insurgency that overthrew Reconstruction in the South. This started at Colfax. And so what you have here, Clean Harbors already had a small operation in Colfax, but they got about 400,000 pounds of the materials that were at Camp Minden and wanted to burn it down at their Colfax facility. And so there were public hearings, there was some agitation, but again, the bulk of the activist community was up in the Shreveport-Minden area. They were kind of viewed as outsiders in Colfax. Colfax is in Grant Parish, named after Ulysses S. Grant after the Civil War, and Colfax was actually Grant's vice presidential candidate. But, so there was, the protest kind of shifted down to Grant Parish, go to the Grant Parish Police Jury is a very poor parish. They wanted the jobs. They wanted the jobs more than they wanted to protect the environment. This happens in Louisiana. This is like the mantra. You know, we will accept neurotoxins for jobs. Come in, pollute us. We'll play climate chicken. Come on, it's Louisiana. So. Over the objections of some local citizens, the police jury, which is the parish, we have parishes in Louisiana, not counties, the local government said, no, we want those jobs, give us those jobs, come burn your stuff in our backyard. And so they've been doing that. They actually had a small permit, they had it increased to almost, they can burn 2 million pounds a year now. Open burns. They call this, you know, if you go to Clean Harbors site, they talk about the great technology they use. Well, fire's been around a long time, and this is what they do there. This is what they do. On a daily basis, they are burning, they burn fire. The main thing they burn is fireworks, but they also burn U.S. munitions and propellants there in the open burn with the consent of the local government. Next slide. So, Brian Salvador, again, the professor at LSU Shreveport, I interviewed him. I have a radio show and podcast in Lafayette, and I've known Brian for a while, and I did an interview with him earlier this year. This was done right before right as the local people were trying to, we're gonna make a business out of this. You can bring your hazardous waste to Camp Minden, and the people actually, you know, they did the right thing. They blocked them, and it worked. That part has a happy ending. No happy ending in Colfax, and so the key to this success in the Camp Minden area was the fact that you had activists who knew what to do, who knew how to wage a campaign. They recognized immediately that it was a political issue, not just an environmental issue, that since it was approved by the Defense Department, since EPA had a role in it, and since the state had a role in it, there were political pressure points that could be played. One person whose picture I did not include in this, Representative Gene Reynolds, a state representative who lives up in the Minden area, played a key role in bringing people to the table. There were a series of public meetings. They formed a working group, but it was all because of citizen activism. And these were not the people you would think that would be, one, fighting the Defense Department, two, fighting the Defense Department on behalf of an environmental issue. But they ended up with, their concerned citizens of Camp Minden ended up with over 8,000 friends on their Facebook page. It was a really vigorous citizens pushback that got this thing converted to at least something that was much safer than the original plan. I can't imagine what would happen, burning 16 million pounds over 200 days, which is the plan approved by our EPA. This is available on my podcast, on my website, and if you go to the last slide, here's my contact information. I'll be around. Where the Alligators Roam is the name of the show. On my website, wherethealligatorsroam.us, you can find Brian's podcast and our conversation about it. Thank you.
So bear with us as we switch computers. If you wouldn't mind walking. But next we have James Marc Leas, a Vermont attorney, past co-chair of the National Lawyers Guild for the Free Palestine Subcommittee. He currently runs a campaign to block the stationing of the F-35 jets in Burlington.
Awesome. Brianne.
Good. All right. So, there's Bernie. All right. So, when you think of Vermont, maybe you think about Bernie Sanders and the next slide, Ben and Jerry. But it's not all peace and love up in Vermont. Next slide, please. Here we have a picture of one of the F-16 fighter bombers that are based at Vermont's main airport in South Burlington, Vermont, just adjacent to the city of Burlington. And those F-16s are flown by our Vermont Air National Guard. Those 18 planes were deployed in Afghanistan in 2013, and they just finished 600 combat missions in Syria and Iraq 6 months ago. Now, not satisfied with the F-16, the Air Force is going to be, next slide please, going to be replacing our aging F-16 fighter bombers with the brand new, wonderful F-35 fighter bomber. And that's it up there. The F-35 is capable of dropping nuclear bombs. And with its stealth coating, or the whole body is coated with this material that absorbs radar, so it can penetrate foreign airspace with its bombs without being detected. It can sneak in and do a first attack and blast people without being without being detected. And Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy, he's the most senior senator in the entire U.S. Senate, is really the driving force for bringing in the F-35. We have our governor, our previous governor, our congressman, and yes, Bernie Sanders, all are ardent supporters of basing the F-35 fighter bomber in South Burlington, Vermont. It's not just Ben and Jerry who oppose F-35 basing, and they've been very active in the campaign, especially Ben. The next slide, please. We have a retired Air Force colonel named Roseanne Greco. Oh, maybe it's the next slide. Yeah, there she is. You might notice who she's with in that picture. She did quite a bit of work with Colin Powell when she was in the Air Force. And she, when she was chair of the South Burlington City Council, she did an independent investigation of the effects of F-35 basing and F-16 basing, actually, on Vermont. And she became a very strong opponent of basing it at the airport, which is actually located in South Burlington. And she stepped down from the council and is now providing a tremendous leadership to the campaign to stop F-35 basing in Vermont. And that campaign has been intense for the last 7 years, since 2010, when the idea of F-35 basing in Vermont first was announced, and that Burlington might be one of 3 choices for being the first Air Guard station where it would be based. We've had, for the 7 years, picket lines and demonstrations. We've had mass protests at Senator Leahy's office, marches, rallies. We had a big debate. We actually got it on the ballot and won the vote in the neighboring city of Winooski, which is 1 mile from the end of the runway, and all the planes taking off going north go right over Winooski. And the vast majority of people voted to stop the F-35. And so we've had all these campaigns. We've gotten the city councils of South Burlington and Winooski to vote against F-35 basing. We've had big town meetings about the health effects. Maybe in the next slide, we can see some of the pictures from some of those events. Keep going. Okay, that last one was the city council meeting in Burlington, and at some of these meetings, the Air Force, Air National Guard, with their uniforms and their general and their so on, have come to participate and try to argue against us. We've had postcard campaigns, letters to the editor. We've had many requests for information under the Freedom of Information Act. We've had 2 lawsuits, both of which we lost. Members of our organization have published more than 25 opinion pieces in local and in national news media. And we've gotten massive interest and coverage in print and broadcast media in Vermont and occasionally nationally. And all the polling that's ever been done shows majority opposition to basing F-35 jets at the airport in South Burlington. But we haven't stopped there. We've tried to take power. And one of the ways we tried to take power, was I ran for Adjutant General. That's the Vermont position, the elected position. It's actually elected by the House and Senate sitting together, that controls the Vermont Army National Guard and the Vermont Air National Guard. I don't think they've ever had a civilian run for the office before. But they did in 2013, and I got to speak to all the different caucuses in in both the House and the Senate, though they didn't really. There were 4 of us running. I sat on the panels and participated in the election. It might be worth mentioning that after that, they changed the law, prohibiting anyone who wasn't a high officer already from running. And also seeking power, I think, is an important thing. If we're going to make the kind of change we need to make in this country. I also ran for election to the South Burlington City Council in March of this year. And I featured opposition to F-16 and F-35 basing. And that wasn't such a bad campaign. I thought I'd be crushed by the incumbent, but I did get 46% of the vote. So that wasn't too bad. Yeah. It was only a 5-week campaign, so, but anyway. So for many people in Vermont, the purpose of opposing F-35 basing includes what this conference is all about: stopping war and stopping deployment of a weapon of mass destruction, and stopping Vermont collaboration and participation in illegal, immoral, and unjust wars of aggression based on lies like the war in Iraq, and stopping weapons that make wars possible and more likely to happen. In addition, there are 5 other highly charged issues that are more local in character. One is the intense noise of these fighter bombers. And another is the high risk of a crash of an F-35 jet and the high consequences when it does crash. Another is that basing military weapons that are like this, offensive military weapons, makes all the thousands of families living in working-class, affordable homes around the airport into human shields, which is illegal. And then there's the loss of housing, affordable housing, and I'll go into that in a moment. And then there's the last one is this governance of the airport, where Burlington owns the airport, and it's located in South Burlington. So all the elected officials that make the decisions about the airport, we don't have accountable government. And that's a provision of our Vermont Constitution. It's a stronger provision than we have in our U.S. Constitution, that you must have an accountable government to the people. And actually, it goes back to 1777, before the U.S. Constitution. We had that in our Vermont Constitution. The F-16 is incredibly loud. It's so loud that an Air Force environmental impacts statement confirmed that F-16 flights subject nearly 2,000 families to such a dangerous level of noise that the Federal Aviation Administration says that these 2,000 homes are unsuitable for residential use. You shouldn't live there. Fortunately, the F-16s, as I said, are pretty old, and they're going to be retired in 2 years. Unfortunately, the same Air Force EIS reports that the F-35 that's coming to replace them is more than 4 times louder than the F-16. The Air Force report says the F-35 is going to keep all those people in this terrible noise zone, but they're going to add thousands more into the intense noise zone, most of them living in Winooski. So the Air Force, the Federal Aviation Administration, the World Health Organization all acknowledge that aircraft noise at that level causes severe damage, especially to children, but also to adults. Reporting on the results of multiple scientific studies, the World Health Organization published a report that concluded that half the children exposed to noise at the level shown in the Air Force report have suffered or will suffer cognitive impairment. That includes delayed reading, degraded concentration, degraded memory and attention, and for adults, heart disease, vascular disease, things like that. In view of the danger, the FAA forthrightly offered the city of Burlington, which owns the airport, grants to buy and demolish the homes in the noise zone under its so-called noise compatibility program. Burlington has so far accepted $57 million in grants from the FAA and bought 200 of these affordable homes in South Burlington, a few less than the 2,000 in the noise zone. But they provided a lot of money to the families. They relocated them, gave them extra money when necessary to get them out of the noise danger zone, and demolished the homes. And they're now 44 acres. Do we have, maybe we could, okay, so we'll just leave it at that. There are now 44 acres of vacant land where those 200 houses once stood. And I want to make this one point. The Air Force did a detailed study of noise, and their report acknowledges that the F-16, which is based there now, dominates the noise at the Burlington Airport, and that the contribution of civilian aircraft to noise, and there are many civilian flights, but the Air Force says that the contribution of civilian aircraft to noise is negligible compared to the military aircraft contribution. So it's F-16 that's causing this problem now, and in the future, 4 times louder F-35. And as I said, the 200 homes are the tip of the iceberg. Now Burlington did its own study. They didn't want this 2,000 homes number. So they did their own study, and they say it's only 976 of these workforce affordable homes that remain in the intense noise zone of the F-16. the same zone as the 200 homes that they acknowledge are in a noise zone and it's dangerous, and they accepted the money and they tore them down. The FAA says they're all unsuitable for residential use and should all be taken down. And the families all relocated, but Burlington and South Burlington don't want to lose affordable homes. So, as I said, the Air Force disagrees with Burlington. They say it's really 2,000, not 976 in the danger zone. Okay, and the Air Force noise map, as I said, will put thousands more into the noise zone when the F-35 arrives. Now, Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy are in total denial about the health and cognitive damage already done to families, even though the federal government spent $57 million to remove 200 people. How can you deny it? But they do. They refuse even to meet with anyone who's opposed to the F-35 basing, who lives in the noise zone. And sadly, on this issue, Bernie Sanders is not leading the way. So, but noise is not the only problem for health and safety. In its report, the Air Force also said that all new fighter jets, and the F-35 is brand new, are expected to have, these new fighter jets all start with a very, very high crash rate. And that after they've had thousands and thousands of hours and many crashes, their crash rate, they do a lot of learning, and the crash rate comes down. So the F-16 has had 330 crashes during its 10 million flight hours of flight since it started in the 1980s. And so its crash rate went from extremely, extremely high down to a level where we haven't had an F-16 crash in Burlington. It came to Burlington when it had 1 million flight hours. But high crash risk is only half the crash problem. The other half is the consequence when it does crash. The F-16 has an aluminum body. So when it crashes, the fuel burns, and it's a terrible conflagration. There's thousands of gallons of fuel burning. But the aluminum body really doesn't burn. But when the F-35 crashes and burns, it's got this composite body. It's like a tennis racket. It's a composite plastic material. It's 8,000 pounds of the stuff. And that is going to burn. And the Air Force has a report on these composite materials and on the stealth coating on it, which also burns. And it emits a dangerous, toxic soup of lots of different chemicals that are and particulates and fibers that when they get in your lungs, they do serious damage and cause cancer and all of that. So the Air Force says the only solution for a populated area is prevention. Don't have the crash. That's their solution. Well, what do Bernie and Leahy and Pat Leahy want to do? They want to put it in the most densely populated area of Vermont. And I will say this, the high crash rate plus the high crash consequence, a foreseeable plume of toxic chemical combustion products is akin to intentional chemical warfare on thousands of Vermont families. So here we are at a peace and environmental conference. We know the incredible horrors of war, we've heard about it this morning, inflicted on foreign civilians and their environment are well known to all of us, from Vietnam to Iraq, and we strongly oppose U.S. intervention. But here is a case of Vermont politicians knowingly, consciously, and intentionally using weapons of war against our own civilians and our own environment for the purpose of training. Politicians are all in lockstep, supporting F-35 basing and demonstrating disregard